Arthur Schopenhauer believed that intelligence is not a gift in the way people like to imagine it. It does not arrive wrapped in clarity, confidence, or peace. It arrives with weight. The more a person understands, the more reality presses against them. Intelligence widens perception, and widened perception exposes contradictions most people never notice. Life looks coherent from a distance. Up close, it fractures. To the average mind, the world is simple enough. Goals feel meaningful. Success appears attainable. Social rules seem reasonable. Pain is interpreted as temporary, and happiness as something just one effort away. Intelligence disrupts this simplicity. It pulls the curtain back and shows how fragile meaning really is, how conditional success becomes, and how temporary satisfaction always was. Schopenhauer argued that suffering increases not because intelligent people feel more pain, but because they feel more of everything. They see further into consequences. They recognize patterns behind behavior. They notice repetition where others see progress. Where one person experiences hope, the intelligent mind also sees probability. Where one person feels comfort, the intelligent mind sees decay already embedded in the moment. This is why intelligence so often feels isolating, not because others are unintelligent, but because perception no longer aligns. Conversations skim the surface, while the mind sinks deeper. Social rituals feel rehearsed. Optimism feels performative. The intelligent individual becomes fluent in a language few people want to speak, the language of uncomfortable truth. History offers countless examples of this burden. Socrates was labeled dangerous, not because he lied, but because he asked too many honest questions. His intelligence disrupted the illusions that held society together. Galileo saw what others could not yet accept, and clarity cost him freedom. Nikola Tesla envisioned futures the world was not prepared to build, and died isolated. Nietzsche saw morality as a construct rather than a command, and paid for that vision with profound loneliness and psychological collapse. These were not failures of character. They were consequences of perception outpacing collective comfort. Schopenhauer believed intelligence forces confrontation with three unavoidable truths: impermanence, desire, and suffering. Everything fades. Everything that is wanted eventually disappoints. And suffering is not an error in the system, it is part of the system. The intelligent mind does not merely experience these truths, it cannot forget them. This is where overthinking begins. The mind loops not because it enjoys thinking, but because it cannot settle for easy answers. Every conclusion opens another question. Every belief exposes another doubt. Certainty dissolves under scrutiny. The intelligent individual does not drown in thought because they are weak, but because they are thorough. And society is poorly designed for this kind of mind. Modern culture rewards speed, confidence, and simplification. Intelligence, however, moves slowly. It hesitates. It qualifies. It doubts itself. In a world that celebrates certainty, doubt looks like incompetence. In a world that rewards optimism, realism looks like pessimism. This mismatch creates friction. Intelligent individuals often feel out of place not because they lack ambition, but because they see the costs of ambition too clearly. They recognize how much effort is spent chasing approval, status, and distraction. They see how rarely these pursuits produce lasting peace. Schopenhauer argued that most people survive by illusion, not stupidity, illusion. Belief in progress, belief in fairness, belief that effort guarantees reward. These beliefs are psychologically useful. They reduce anxiety. They keep people moving. Intelligence weakens these illusions, and without them, the mind stands exposed. This exposure produces a specific kind of pain. Not dramatic despair, but low-grade existential fatigue. A sense that everything requires effort and nothing fully satisfies. The intelligent mind becomes hyper-aware of time passing, opportunities closing, bodies aging, relationships shifting. Joy is still possible, but it is fragile because its impermanence is always visible. This is why intelligent people are often drawn to philosophy, art, and solitude, not out of arrogance, but necessity. They need spaces where complexity is allowed to exist without being flattened, where questions are not rushed toward answers, where ambiguity is not treated as failure. Schopenhauer did not believe intelligence should be suppressed. He believed it must be understood. When intelligence is misunderstood, it turns inward and becomes destructive. When understood, it becomes disciplined. The first step is recognizing that suffering is not proof of personal failure. It is a natural byproduct of awareness. To see deeply is to feel deeply. To think clearly is to lose comforting illusions. The intelligent individual is not broken, they are awake. But awakening is only the beginning, because awareness alone does not bring peace. It only explains why peace is rare. Schopenhauer believed that beneath every thought, every plan, and every emotion, there is a deeper force operating long before reason enters the scene. He called this force the will. The will is not logical, moral, or thoughtful. It simply pushes, it urges life to continue, to want, to strive, to repeat itself endlessly. Hunger, ambition, fear, attraction, jealousy, survival, these are not chosen. They arise. Every human being is driven by this will, but intelligence radically changes how it is experienced. The less reflective person obeys desire almost automatically. Want leads to action. Action leads to distraction. Distraction prevents reflection. Life moves forward without too much friction. Suffering exists, but it is often brief and quickly replaced by the next pursuit. The intelligent mind does not have this luxury. Awareness inserts itself between desire and action. The intelligent individual does not just want, they notice wanting. They see the urge arise, recognize its origin, predict its outcome, and question its value, often all at once. Desire no longer feels simple, it feels suspicious. This hesitation slows life down, and in that slowing, discomfort grows. Schopenhauer argued that intelligence does not reduce desire. In many cases, it amplifies it. The intelligent mind anticipates pleasure more vividly and imagines fulfillment more precisely. But it also foresees disappointment with equal clarity. Every desire arrives already shadowed by its ending. Satisfaction is never pure, because its impermanence is already known. This is the psychological trap. The will demands pursuit, but intelligence exposes the futility of that pursuit. The individual becomes trapped between impulse and insight. They want what they already know will not satisfy them. They chase goals they already understand will not bring peace. This internal contradiction produces a unique form of suffering, quiet, persistent, exhausting. This is why intelligent people often feel chronically dissatisfied even when their lives appear successful. Achievement does not silence the mind, it sharpens it. Each milestone reached becomes evidence that the next will be equally hollow. The intelligent individual does not suffer because they lack pleasure, but because pleasure fails to answer the deeper questions they cannot stop asking. Schopenhauer believed most people are protected from this awareness by constant engagement. Noise, work, entertainment, social obligations. These act as buffers against reflection. The intelligent mind often sees through these distractions. What comforts others feels numbing. What excites others feels repetitive. The mind remains awake when it desperately wants rest. This is where melancholy emerges, not dramatic sadness but a lingering heaviness, a sense that effort outweighs reward, that existence demands more than it gives. This melancholy is not irrational. It is the emotional response to perceiving reality without filters. Importantly, Schopenhauer did not see this suffering as meaningless. He believed awareness, though painful, contains the seed of freedom. When the will operates unconsciously, it controls behavior completely. When it is seen clearly, its authority weakens. Observation interrupts compulsion. The intelligent mind begins to notice that many desires are inherited rather than chosen. Status, validation, constant stimulation. These are not personal needs but social scripts. When this recognition deepens, desire loses urgency. The mind starts to pause instead of react. This pause is crucial. In that pause, a small space opens between impulse and obedience. That space is not happiness, but it is freedom. For the first time, the individual is not entirely ruled by craving. They can choose restraint, they can choose simplicity, they can choose not to pursue every urge simply because it exists. Schopenhauer believes suffering intensifies when we demand life be other than what it is. The intelligent mind often suffers most when it resists reality, when it insists on fairness, permanence, or final answers. The world does not offer these things. Acceptance, though often misunderstood, reduces this friction. Acceptance does not mean approval, it means clarity without protest. When the intelligent individual stops demanding that existence justify itself, mental exhaustion eases. The mind no longer wastes energy fighting conditions it cannot change. Another crucial shift follows. Not everything needs to be understood. Intelligence often collapses under its own ambition. It tries to explain meaning where none exists, certainty where ambiguity is fundamental. Schopenhauer believed peace begins when the mind learns the limits of explanation. When thought stops serving desire, stops trying to rationalize craving, justify ego, or secure permanence, it changes character. Thinking becomes contemplative rather than compulsive. Observation replaces rumination. This is not the end of suffering, but it is the end of unnecessary suffering. The will continues to move, but it no longer drags the mind blindly with it. Awareness, once a source of pain, begins to function as distance. And in that distance, the intelligent individual discovers the possibility of relief. Schopenhauer believed there was one domain where this relief appears most naturally, without effort or discipline. That domain is aesthetic experience. And it is there that intelligence finally finds rest. Schopenhauer believed that art provides one of the rare moments in which the human mind can escape the constant pressure of desire. In ordinary life, perception is never neutral. We see objects in terms of usefulness, threat, attraction, or advantage. Everything is filtered through the question, what does this mean for me? The will is always present, pulling attention toward wanting, avoiding, or controlling. Art interrupts this process. In aesthetic experience, the mind perceives without personal demand. A landscape, a painting, a poem, or a melody is no longer something to use or possess. It is simply observed. For a brief moment, the individual forgets themselves. The ego loosens. Desire falls quiet. Intelligence, normally restless and analytical, becomes still. This stillness is not emptiness. It is relief. For the intelligent individual, whose mind is usually overloaded with interpretation and anticipation, art creates a psychological distance from suffering. Problems do not disappear, but they lose their urgency. Thought stops circling. Time seems to slow. Awareness expands without pressure. Schopenhauer considered this state profoundly important because it reveals something essential. Suffering is not constant because pain is constant, but because desire is constant. When desire pauses, suffering weakens. Art does not fix life, but it suspends the forces that make life exhausting. Among all art forms, Schopenhauer placed music at the highest level. Unlike visual art or literature, music does not represent the world through concepts or images. It does not tell stories or describe objects. It expresses the inner movement of existence itself. Rhythm mirrors striving. Harmony reflects tension and release. Melody carries longing without explanation. Because music bypasses language and intellect, it reaches the mind before analysis can interfere. This is why music affects people so deeply, even when they cannot explain why. For the intelligent individual, music provides a rare escape from overthinking. There is nothing to solve, nothing to interpret correctly. One can simply experience. This experience teaches the mind something crucial. It does not always need to understand in order to be at peace. From this realization, detachment begins to grow. Detachment does not mean indifference. It means the ability to observe without immediately reacting. The intelligent individual starts to apply this aesthetic distance to daily life. Thoughts are noticed rather than obeyed. Emotions are felt without being amplified by narrative. Schopenhauer encouraged cultivating this attitude intentionally. When a desire arises, the reflective mind can step back and watch it unfold. Where does it come from? How long does it last? What happens if it is not satisfied immediately? Often the answer is surprising. The desire weakens on its own. This practice changes the relationship with suffering. Pain is no longer automatically interpreted as a problem that must be eliminated at all costs. It becomes a signal, an experience, something that passes. The intelligent mind stops turning discomfort into catastrophe. Solitude plays an important role here. Schopenhauer valued solitude not as escape from people, but as protection from mental noise. Social environments often reinforce borrowed desires, comparisons, and performative identities. In solitude, the mind can hear itself again. Thought slows. Priorities realign. However, solitude alone is not enough. Without perspective, it can harden into isolation. Schopenhauer believed compassion balances detachment. When intelligence recognizes its own suffering clearly, it also recognizes suffering in others. This shared condition dissolves superiority and resentment. Compassion transforms intelligence from something that separates into something that connects. Instead of viewing others as shallow or misguided, the perceptive mind sees them as governed by the same will, struggling under different illusions. Judgment softens. Understanding deepens. Art, detachment, solitude, and compassion together reshape the intelligent mind. Awareness no longer overwhelms. It becomes spacious. Thought slows down enough to be useful. The mind learns when to engage and when to step back. This shift prepares the individual for a deeper transformation, one that goes beyond managing desire and enters the realm of ego itself. Because as long as the ego dominates perception, intelligence remains vulnerable to suffering. Schopenhauer believed the next step was learning how to loosen that grip. Schopenhauer believed that intelligence becomes most painful when it is chained to the ego. The ego insists that everything be personal. Success becomes proof of worth. Failure becomes condemnation. Every interaction is interpreted as judgment, threat, or validation. For the intelligent mind, this constant self-referencing turns awareness into a source of anxiety rather than clarity. The sharper the intellect, the sharper the ego's tools. Intelligence enables endless comparison, self-criticism, and anticipation of how one is perceived. The mind replays conversations, predicts rejection, and imagines outcomes that may never happen. What begins as awareness becomes mental overexposure. Schopenhauer did not argue that the ego should be destroyed. He believed it should be quieted. The self is necessary for functioning, but destructive when it dominates perception. When intelligence serves ego, it becomes defensive and restless. When intelligence observes ego, it regains balance. This is where Schopenhauer introduced the idea of renunciation, influenced heavily by Eastern philosophy. Renunciation does not mean rejecting the world, abandoning responsibilities, or suppressing desire by force. It means releasing the belief that fulfillment depends on external outcomes. The intelligent individual learns to act without clinging. Clinging is the source of most mental suffering. When identity is attached to success, failure threatens the self. When happiness is tied to control, uncertainty becomes terrifying. Renunciation loosens these bindings. Effort continues, but desperation fades. Ambition remains, but it no longer carries existential weight. This shift radically changes how intelligence operates. The mind no longer uses thought to defend identity or justify worth. Thinking becomes cleaner. Decisions become less reactive. The intelligent individual starts responding to reality rather than constantly negotiating with imagined futures. Renunciation also changes emotional life. Emotions are no longer interpreted as commands. Anxiety arises without panic. Sadness appears without collapse. Joy is felt without fear of loss. The intelligent mind, once overwhelmed by its own sensitivity, becomes emotionally resilient. Schopenhauer believed modern society actively undermines this discipline. Constant comparison, performance, and stimulation inflate the ego and exhaust intelligence. The mind is encouraged to react, judge, and compete without rest. Choosing restraint in such an environment becomes an act of resistance. Restraint includes restraint of thought. Not every thought needs attention. Not every question deserves an answer. Intelligence matures when it learns discrimination, what to pursue and what to let pass. Silence becomes a skill rather than a void. Mortality plays a crucial role in this transformation. Intelligence sharpens awareness of death, and this awareness often produces anxiety. Schopenhauer saw another possibility. When impermanence is accepted rather than resisted, trivial concerns lose power. Time becomes precious instead of threatening. Acceptance of mortality strips life of false urgency. It reveals what actually matters. Moments of understanding, beauty, and connection gain depth because they are finite. The intelligent mind learns gratitude not as optimism but as realism. Through ego moderation, renunciation, and temporal clarity, intelligence undergoes a final discipline. It stops demanding that life conform to ideals. It aligns with reality instead of fighting it. This alignment does not eliminate suffering, but it prevents suffering from dominating consciousness. The mind becomes quieter, not empty, but stable. Awareness widens without overwhelming. Intelligence, once a source of tension, becomes a tool for presence. Schopenhauer believed this state was not mystical or rare. It was simply difficult. It required consistent awareness, honest self-observation, and the courage to live without comforting illusions. And yet, even this discipline is incomplete without integration, because intelligence is not meant to withdraw from life. It is meant to guide how life is lived. Having explored awareness, detachment, aesthetic engagement, ego moderation, and renunciation, we arrive at the final stage of Schopenhauer's guidance, integration. Here, intelligence is no longer merely a cognitive tool or a source of suffering. It becomes a fully embodied instrument for navigating life with depth, purpose, and serenity. The highly perceptive mind, once burdened by overthinking and hyper-awareness, discovers that its gifts can cultivate liberation, ethical action, and profound aesthetic experience. Integration begins with the recognition that life is inherently complex, unpredictable, and often painful. The intelligent individual perceives impermanence, recognizes suffering, and feels the weight of existential uncertainty. Yet this perception, when tempered by reflection and detachment, does not lead to despair. Instead, it offers clarity. One can discern the essential from the trivial, the meaningful from the fleeting. The mind, once overwhelmed by endless possibilities, learns to focus on what truly matters, relationships, experiences, and acts that resonate with purpose. Central to this integration is the interplay of awareness and action. Intelligence is not meant solely for contemplation. While deep reflection sharpens understanding and fosters insight, it must also translate into ethical and deliberate engagement. Observing desires, identifying compulsions of the will, and moderating egoic tendencies all guide practical behavior. The intelligent mind acts with intention, rather than reacting impulsively to external circumstances or internal anxieties. Each choice becomes informed, measured, and aligned with insight. Artistic and aesthetic engagement continues to play a vital role. Music, literature, painting, and other expressive forms allow the mind to transcend habitual compulsions, entering a state of pure perception where intellect and emotion harmonize. In these moments, intelligence serves as a bridge to experience the essence of existence beyond analysis, comparison, or judgment. Through sustained immersion in art, the perceptive individual cultivates emotional richness, experiential clarity, and glimpses of universal truth. Compassion is the ethical extension of intelligence. Awareness of suffering, one's own and others, naturally fosters empathy. Yet Schopenhauer emphasized that true compassion is active, not passive. It involves ethical engagement, supporting others, alleviating distress where possible, and participating in shared humanity. Intelligence magnifies empathy, revealing layers of suffering often unnoticed by less perceptive minds. By acting on this awareness, isolation is replaced with connection, and insight transforms into meaningful contribution. Detachment and renunciation remain essential, preventing the mind from becoming enslaved by desire, ego, or ambition. By letting go of compulsions, the intelligent individual cultivates inner space, a sanctuary of calm within which perception can operate freely. Detachment does not imply disengagement. It allows the mind to fully engage in life without being dominated by transient anxieties or relentless striving. Renunciation of attachment to outcomes reduces suffering and strengthens emotional resilience, enabling intelligence to function as a stabilizing, clarifying force. Temporal awareness also plays a key role in integration. Recognition of mortality and impermanence sharpens focus on the present, illuminating fleeting opportunities for joy, insight, and connection. Awareness of life's finitude does not produce panic but prioritizes meaning. Moments of beauty, small acts of kindness, and genuine human interaction gain significance precisely because they are temporary. The intelligent mind, attuned to impermanence, learns to live deliberately, balancing urgency with reflection, action with serenity. Schopenhauer's vision of intelligence is ultimately holistic. Awareness, aesthetic engagement, compassion, detachment, renunciation, and temporal clarity interweave to create a coherent approach to living. The intelligent mind is no longer a source of torment, but a conduit for freedom, insight, and ethical participation. Suffering is not eliminated, it is reframed as a teacher. Solitude is not a burden, it is an opportunity for reflection and depth. Desire is not suppressed, it is understood and directed. In this integrated state, intelligence illuminates life's complexity while providing the stability to navigate it consciously. Even ordinary experiences, when approached with this mindset, acquire depth. A conversation, a piece of music, a walk in nature, each becomes an opportunity to perceive, reflect, and engage fully. Intelligence, once a restless and overactive force, becomes a lens for appreciating subtlety, nuance, and interconnectedness. Life is no longer merely survived, it is observed, experienced, and actively shaped through conscious, ethical engagement. The ultimate lesson of Schopenhauer's philosophy is that intelligence, despite its burdens, is a profound gift when properly oriented. Awareness of suffering, impermanence, and desire is not a source of despair, but a foundation for liberation. By integrating reflection, detachment, aesthetic immersion, ethical action, and renunciation, the mind transforms its acute perception into wisdom, serenity, and ethical engagement. Intelligence is not an escape from life. It is a guide for inhabiting it fully, consciously, and meaningfully. As the final thought, consider this. The perceptive mind faces challenges others may never notice. It sees impermanence where others see stability, complexity where others see simplicity, suffering where others see comfort. Yet, when guided by Schopenhauer's principles, this very mind becomes a vessel of liberation. Awareness leads to presence. Sensitivity fosters empathy. Reflection cultivates action aligned with purpose. Art opens gateways to timeless beauty. Detachment and renunciation liberate from compulsions. Mortality teaches prioritization. Intelligence, properly integrated, becomes both sword and shield, a tool for insight, a safeguard against unnecessary suffering, and a pathway to profound engagement with the world. In essence, Schopenhauer reframes intelligence not as a source of torment, but as a gateway to holistic human flourishing. The highly perceptive individual, once isolated and restless, learns to live with clarity, purpose, and serenity. Life is approached with conscious presence, aesthetic appreciation, ethical engagement, and emotional resilience. The mind, once burdened by its own acuity, becomes a source of freedom, depth, and meaningful connection. Intelligence, fully integrated, is not merely an attribute, it is a way of life,